how do you sort of make trade-off decisions as an AppSec manager about doing it right the first time versus getting something done that you can build on? And I'll give you an example from my own experience. Was working with a web-based application that had so many poor practices. Did not use code reuse, so there was input libraries all over the place instead of only one. And of course, there were vulnerabilities in each of those libraries. Mm-hmm. And the AppSec professional I had who was working with the development team said, look, if I file a bug against all of them that's a one-line code change, they'll just copy and paste that one line. And what I really want them to do is write one library where they can do input sanitization. So they filed the bug against one library and then waited and then filed the bug against another library so that it was hard to just copy and paste the change. And after a little while, the developers understood what was happening and said, oh, if I bring this into one library, it'll be better. And then the developers had the right mindset going forward. And I was always impressed by understanding the psychology of the developer by saying, yes, we'll let them do it the wrong way a few times until they learn what the right way is on their own, rather than just lecturing to them.
Yeah.
And so how do you find that in practice across many organizations?
It's interesting to see that this happens in other places, because it's definitely a very clever way to approach this. At the end, security is not the owner of the code. They cannot change the code, and they have to have someone do it for them. They are just responsible in raising the awareness and maybe sometimes giving the advice. Some developers wouldn't even accept your advice. They say, I know how to fix this, I know how to go about this. And this kind of approach is very clever, and it reminds me very different aspects of this, different aspects of the same problem in different activities in the past. So for example, a similar thing can be, you come in, you find a specific bug that exists in a specific place, and then you ask the developers to fix it, but you know that it exists in many other places. So you go to framework team and tell them, I want this fixed in the framework. I want this fixed as a secure by design kind of approach, but they wouldn't do anything. Because changing a framework is much more difficult than changing just code that uses it. And it's kind of, so what you're describing now is a bottom-up approach to bringing this education into the organization and actually making them feel that they came up with the real problem and the real solution, which is great. But the same problem exists also when we talk about top-down approach. So you come to engineering leaders and you tell them you have to make a significant change here because this problem will propagate across to the full organization, and they will tell you, prove. You have to prove. You have to prove that this is a real problem, that this really... And then I had a couple of cases when this was the situation. So for the first one, I just hustled through collecting all the data and talking to countless developers to fix instances. I wasn't as clever as you described.
Probably very expensive in time.
Yeah, very expensive in time. But this was my campaign, and I was happy about this because it gave me, it forced me to look into the data that developers have on their applications, sparking some of the ideas that we use today in Enzo also. But it really brought me in a much deeper level to interact with the same data the developers are using. Mm-hmm. And with this data, what I could do is I could ask how many instances of this problem we have with a query. And moving from being able to look into an artifact, look into a combination of conditions, say this is vulnerable, opening one Jira ticket to the developer fixing this instance, to being able to describe the same situation in a query and ask the full data that I have and come to engineering leaders and say 25% of our applications from this type are vulnerable to this, please fix. This worked. But just telling them there is a general problem, and this is the theory of this general problem, you need to take action, never worked.
Right.